She called me an opportunist, while her own bank accounts bled red. Victoria Crawford smiled at me across her antique dinner table, the same table the bank would repossess in 90 days, and told her son I wasn't their kind of people. I sat there in silence, knowing that with one phone call, I could save her crumbling empire or bury it forever. She planted fake evidence at my wedding rehearsal dinner, hired an actor to call me a cheater in front of everyone I loved. What she didn't know? I owned the company about to purchase hers, and I was done being silent. Subscribe now. Revenge tastes better when you watch it unfold. I learned to count my worth in the pauses between insults before I learned to count money. Growing up as the daughter of Marcus and Eleanor Williams in Atlanta, Georgia meant growing up with everything and nothing simultaneously. Everything material, nothing resembling peace in spaces designed for people who looked nothing like me. The Williams family built Monarch Holdings from a single apartment building my grandfather purchased in 1962 with money he saved working 3 jobs for 22 years, and by the time I was born, that single building had multiplied into a $2 billion real estate empire spanning the entire Southeast. My childhood bedroom had silk sheets and original artwork on the walls, but the country clubs where my parents held memberships made me feel like I was wrapped in sandpaper every time I walked through their pristine doors. I remember being 7 years old at the Buckhead Tennis Club, waiting for my lesson, when a woman in pearls asked me to fetch her a towel because she assumed I was there to serve, not to play. My mother found me crying in the bathroom 20 minutes later, and instead of comforting me with soft words, she knelt down, looked me in the eyes, and said something that would shape the rest of my life. "Baby girl, they will always underestimate you. Let them. It makes victory so much sweeter when they never see you coming." My father taught me about compound interest when I was 9. He spread financial documents across his mahogany desk in his home office, the smell of his cigars mixing with paper and ambition, and explained that wealth was not about what you had, but what you could multiply. I absorbed numbers the way other children absorbed cartoons, finding comfort in the predictability of mathematics when human behavior proved so consistently cruel. At Westbrook Academy, the most prestigious private school in Atlanta, I was one of 4 Black students in a class of 312, and not a single week passed without someone questioning whether I truly belonged there, or if my father's donations had purchased my seat. Teachers graded my papers with suspicious scrutiny, certain that excellence from me must be explained by something other than my own intelligence, and I learned to document everything, to keep copies of my work, to build evidence of my own competence because my word would never be enough. When I graduated valedictorian, the headmaster actually pulled my parents aside to suggest I share the honor with the white girl who had earned second place, citing community harmony as his reasoning. My father's response became legendary among the school's board of directors, though the exact words he used have never been repeated in polite company. And I walked across that stage alone, holding my honor with both hands. Wharton School of Business should have been my coronation, the place where my family's legacy and my own abilities merged into an unstoppable force. Instead, it became the place where I finally broke, not from failure, but from the exhausting performance of excellence in the face of constant skepticism. My professors questioned my admission despite my perfect GRE scores. My classmates assumed I was a diversity acceptance rather than the legacy admission I technically was, and every achievement felt like it had to be earned twice over just to be acknowledged once. I spent 4 semesters building walls around my heart, learning to smile at microaggressions like they were compliments, transforming myself into a version of Vanessa Williams who could survive hostile rooms without bleeding visibly. The night before my 25th birthday, I sat in my off-campus apartment surrounded by textbooks and case studies, and I felt something inside me simply stop. Not break exactly, but cease its constant effort to prove and prove and prove. I called my father at 2 a.m, and before I could explain anything, he simply said, "Come home when you're ready. The company isn't going anywhere." I withdrew from Wharton the following week, and for the first time in my life, I chose disappearance over dominance. Brooklyn became my sanctuary, my resurrection, my chance to exist without the weight of the Williams name pressing down on my shoulders. I found an apartment in a brownstone in Fort Greene, surrounded by artists and writers and musicians who couldn't care less about my family's net worth, and I rebuilt myself from the foundation up. I worked as a freelance consultant, using my financial knowledge to help small businesses navigate their growth, without ever revealing that I could have bought their entire block with my trust fund. I dated men who didn't Google me, who liked me for my laugh and my opinions on documentary films, and my ability to find the best jerk chicken within a 5-mile radius. For 8 years, I lived a beautiful lie. The lie that I was ordinary, that I could escape the responsibilities I had been born into, that I could simply be Vanessa, without the Williams attached like a golden anchor. I visited my family regularly, loved them fiercely, but refused to set foot inside Monarch Holdings headquarters, refused to attend board meetings, refused to let the empire consume the person I was trying so desperately to become. My father respected my choice even as he waited patiently for me to change my mind, and my mother told me stories about the company's latest acquisitions, the way other mothers might discuss neighborhood gossip, light, informational, never pressuring. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in March, when the Brooklyn sky was just beginning to soften from winter gray into something resembling spring. My father's voice was different before he even spoke actual words. There was a gravity to his breathing, a weight in the pause before he said my name, and I knew immediately that my ordinary life was about to end. "Vila," he said, using the Portuguese endearment my grandmother had taught him decades ago. "I have cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 3. The doctors are optimistic about treatment, but I need you now. I need all of you." I don't remember what I said in response, only that I was packing a suitcase before we hung up, my hands moving with muscle memory while my mind tried to process the impossible reality of my father's mortality. Marcus Williams had always seemed invincible to me, a man who built empires and survived recessions and faced down discrimination with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly how powerful he was. Hearing him admit vulnerability felt like watching a mountain acknowledge it could crumble, and something inside me that had been sleeping for 8 years finally woke up, stretched its limbs, and prepared to fight. My father's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Each of his 3 children would take responsibility for a different arm of Monarch Holdings, dividing the empire's oversight while he underwent treatment. My brother Raymond would handle operations. My sister Celeste would manage legal and compliance. And I, the prodigal daughter, the one who had run from responsibility for nearly a decade, would lead expansion, identifying new markets and acquisition opportunities. Savannah, Georgia was my first assignment, a historic city where Monarch had been quietly purchasing properties for 2 years, preparing for a major development initiative that could reshape the entire downtown corridor. "But I have one condition," I told my father during our strategy meeting, the conference room filled with lawyers and executives who had known me since childhood. "I go anonymous. No one in Savannah knows who I am. I present as a consultant, live modestly, operate in the shadows. Daniel can be the public face, the CEO people negotiate with. I work better when nobody's watching." My father smiled, and in that smile I saw both pride and recognition. He understood exactly why I needed invisibility, understood the exhaustion of performing excellence, and he gave me the gift of being a ghost with unlimited power. Subscribe now to watch the ghost reveal herself. Savannah wrapped around me like a humidity-soaked embrace the moment I stepped off the plane, the air thick with history and honeysuckle, and the particular heaviness of a southern city that had never fully reckoned with its past. I found an apartment in the historic district, a modest 1-bedroom above a bookshop on Broughton Street, and I furnished it with secondhand pieces and plants I had no business trying to keep alive. My wardrobe shrank from designer labels to thrift store finds. My car became a Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper, and my daily routine involved coffee from a local cafe where nobody recognized my face or my name. The anonymity felt like oxygen after years of holding my breath, and I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised even me, analyzing property values, meeting with city officials under Daniel's name, mapping out the future of Savannah's development, without anyone knowing that the woman in simple dresses and minimal jewelry was signing deals worth tens of millions of dollars. I had forgotten how much I loved the work itself, the puzzle of real estate, the thrill of seeing potential in crumbling buildings that others dismissed as unsalvageable. And for the first few months, I was genuinely happy in my chosen obscurity. The Telfair Museum's exhibition opened on a Friday evening in September, showcasing contemporary Southern artists alongside historical works that traced the evolution of Georgia's creative landscape. I attended alone, as I attended most things in Savannah, drifting through the galleries with a glass of wine I had forgotten to drink, lost in a painting of marsh grass that captured the exact color of the wetlands I drove past every morning. "That piece sold in the first hour," a voice beside me said, and I turned to find a man studying the same painting with what appeared to be genuine appreciation, rather than performative art world posturing. He was tall, with the kind of blue eyes that seemed impossible outside of retouched photographs, and his smile was crooked in a way that suggested he had never bothered to fix it because he didn't care enough about perfection. "I'm not surprised," I replied, gesturing toward the delicate interplay of green and gold in the brushwork. "She understands how the light hits the water around here. Most artists get it wrong." He introduced himself as Ethan Crawford, an attorney who specialized in estate planning, and we spent the next 3 hours talking about everything except ourselves. Art, Savannah, the gentrification debates that were reshaping southern cities, the best place to get shrimp and grits at 2 a.m. Ethan didn't ask what I did for work until our third date, and when I told him I was a consultant specializing in small business development, he simply nodded and moved on to asking about my favorite books. The absence of interrogation felt revolutionary after years of dating men who treated my family's wealth as either an intimidation or an opportunity, and I found myself falling for him with a velocity that should have frightened me, but instead felt like coming home. He took me to hole-in-the-wall restaurants where the owners knew his name, introduced me to his favorite spots along the riverfront where we would sit and watch the cargo ships pass, and never once did he try to impress me with his family's supposed prominence in Savannah society. I knew the Crawfords, of course. Their name appeared on street signs and historical registers. Their mansion in Ardsley Park was a landmark on every architectural tour, but Ethan spoke of his family with a complicated affection that suggested not everything behind those elegant doors was as pristine as the exterior. "My mother has expectations," he told me one night, his hand warm in mine as we walked through Forsyth Park, "and I've spent most of my life either meeting them or recovering from failing to meet them. She means well, in her way. She just doesn't always understand that her way isn't the only way." The invitation to Sunday dinner at the Crawford Mansion arrived exactly 6 months into our relationship, delivered not by Ethan, but by a formal card on cream-colored stationery with his mother's initials embossed in gold. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing an elegant but understated dress that walked the line between impressive and non-threatening, and I prepared myself for the particular performance that meeting a Southern boyfriend's mother would require. What I was not prepared for was Victoria Crawford herself, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes, whose compliments contained barbs wrapped in silk, and whose gaze swept over me with a calculation that I recognized immediately from every country club, every boardroom, every space where I had been weighed and found wanting before I opened my mouth. "How interesting that you two met at an art exhibition," Victoria said during the first course, her tone suggesting that interesting was not a compliment. Ethan has always been drawn to unexpected choices. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard, whose handshake had been damp with nervousness, said nothing, and I noticed the way his eyes kept drifting toward the antique sideboard, as if cataloging its value, as if wondering how long they could keep it. The dinner lasted 3 hours, and in that time, Victoria managed to insult my profession, my apartment, my car, my hair, and my education without ever saying anything that could be quoted as directly offensive. She asked where my people were from in a way that made it clear she meant something very different than geography. She commented on how articulate I was, with a surprise that dripped condescension. And she mentioned several times that the Crawfords had been in Savannah for 7 generations, as if longevity were a moral achievement rather than a geographical accident. Ethan tensed beside me with each veiled attack, but I placed my hand on his knee beneath the table and smiled through every insult, recognizing this battle for what it was: a test, a gauntlet, a woman marking her territory with passive aggression because she sensed, correctly, that I was not someone who could be easily dismissed. I had faced Victoria Crawfords my entire life, in classrooms and boardrooms and club dining rooms, and I knew that showing pain would only invite more attacks, that the only weapon against this particular enemy was impenetrable composure. When we left that evening, Ethan apologized for the entire drive home, but I simply kissed his cheek and told him his mother was not his responsibility to manage. Something didn't add up about the Crawford family, and the analyst in me couldn't let the inconsistency rest. The mansion was beautiful, but showing its age in ways that suggested deferred maintenance rather than intentional patina. The roof had visible repairs that didn't quite match. The gardens were slightly overgrown in corners a truly wealthy family would have addressed immediately, and Victoria wore the same diamond earrings to every event as if they were her only pair. I told myself that suspecting my boyfriend's family was paranoid, that not everything needed to be investigated, that some mysteries were better left unsolved. But the training my father had given me since childhood wouldn't allow me to ignore red flags just because they were wrapped in historic wallpaper. I called Daniel, my public-facing CEO at Monarch Holdings, and asked him to run a quiet financial assessment on Crawford and Associates, the family law firm that had been in operation for 4 generations. Just curious, I told him. The firm might be a potential partnership opportunity for our Savannah expansion. The lie came easily. The way lies always came easily when I was protecting myself from uncertainty. And I waited for the report with an anticipation that felt like dread dressed in business casual. The file arrived 48 hours later, and I read it 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. Crawford and Associates was drowning in $4.7 million of debt, hemorrhaging clients who had discovered that the firm's legendary reputation was built on a foundation that had been crumbling for over a decade. Richard Crawford, Victoria's husband, had made a series of catastrophic investment decisions in the mid-2010s, betting the firm's reserves on development projects that failed spectacularly, and they had been hemorrhaging ever since, selling assets, taking loans, maintaining a facade of wealth, while the structure collapsed from within. The mansion was 3 months from foreclosure. Victoria's credit cards were maxed to their limits. And most deliciously, most devastatingly, Monarch Holdings had been in preliminary discussions to invest $6 million in Crawford and Associates as part of our Savannah expansion strategy, discussions that had been paused awaiting my approval as head of the expansion division. I was, quite literally, the only person who could save the family that treated me like trash. The months that followed the discovery of the Crawfords' financial collapse became a study in restraint, a masterclass in watching your enemy destroy themselves while you hold all the power they don't know you possess. Victoria escalated her attacks with every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every accidental encounter at social events, and I absorbed each insult like a researcher cataloging data, adding entries to a ledger that would eventually come due. She made comments about my natural hair that suggested I should straighten it to look more professional, asked repeatedly whether I was sure I could afford the restaurants Ethan chose for our dates, and introduced me to her friends as Ethan's current girlfriend, with an emphasis on current that implied impermanence. Her campaign of contempt was relentless, creative, and precisely calibrated to wound without leaving visible scars, and I admired her technique even as I despised her soul. Ethan defended me when he witnessed the attacks, but Victoria was clever enough to save her worst behavior for moments when her son was distracted or absent, creating a shadow war between us that he could sense, but never fully confirm. The engagement ring appeared on a Sunday morning in spring, presented not in some elaborate public gesture, but in the quiet of Ethan's apartment, where he had made pancakes and scattered flower petals across the kitchen table, with the clumsy earnestness of a man who had never planned a romantic gesture before. "I know my mother is difficult," he said, his blue eyes serious in a way I had rarely seen, "and I know I'm asking you to take on more than just me, but I love you, Vanessa. I love who you are when you're not trying to prove anything to anyone. I love that you see the world clearly and still choose to be kind. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like, wherever you want to build it." The ring was modest by Crawford standards, probably the most he could afford, given what I knew about his family's finances, and I loved him more for that honesty than I could have loved any extravagant diamond. I said yes without hesitation, without calculation, without any thought of revenge or irony, or the delicious coincidence of my secret power. In that moment, I was simply a woman in love with a man who saw her clearly, and everything else, the wealth, the deception, the waiting storm, felt like someone else's story. Victoria's response to our engagement announcement resembled nothing so much as a declaration of war dressed in mother-of-the-groom attire. She inserted herself into every wedding decision with suggestions that were actually demands, questioned each vendor choice, and made it abundantly clear that she expected the wedding to reflect Crawford prestige, rather than anything the bride might want. The venue should be the Savannah Golf Club where the Crawfords were members. The flowers should come from her preferred florist. The guest list should include every prominent family in Georgia society, regardless of whether Ethan and I had ever met them. I agreed to nothing and refused nothing, employing the same passive resistance that had served me through years of hostile boardrooms. And I let Ethan fight the battles that mattered while I saved my energy for the war I knew was coming. My own family's involvement in the wedding planning remained deliberately minimal. My parents would attend, my siblings would stand beside me, but no one would know that the bride's side of the aisle represented more wealth than Victoria Crawford had ever dreamed of touching. The secret had become a weapon, sharpened by months of patience, and I could feel its edge growing keener with every condescending remark. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the Old Pink House, one of Savannah's most historic restaurants, and I dressed that evening with the particular care of a woman preparing for battle. My parents had flown in from Atlanta that morning, checking into the mansion on Forsyth Park, under assumed names at my request, and my father's presence in the city felt like having reinforcements stationed just over the hill. Victoria had been unusually calm during the rehearsal itself, her smile fixed and her compliments almost genuine, and I knew with the certainty of a lifetime's experience that her quiet meant she was planning something devastating. The restaurant glowed with candlelight and history as our party of 30 settled into the private dining room, glasses of champagne catching the light as toasts began, and I watched Victoria across the table with the focused attention of a predator who knows she is also prey. My mother caught my eye and raised one elegant eyebrow, recognizing the tension I was hiding behind my practiced smile, and I nodded slightly to confirm that yes, something was coming, and yes, I was ready. He appeared between the appetizers and the main course, a young man in an expensive suit that didn't quite fit, bursting through the private dining room doors with the theatrical energy of someone who had rehearsed this entrance. "Vanessa!" he shouted, loud enough for every diner in the restaurant to hear, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "You were going to marry him without telling me? After everything we shared last month? All those nights together? All those promises?" The room fell into the specific silence of collective scandal, 30 pairs of eyes swiveling between the stranger and me, and I felt, rather than saw, Victoria's small smile of satisfaction bloom across her carefully composed face. Ethan rose from his seat, his face cycling through confusion and hurt and anger, and my mother's hand gripped my father's arm with barely contained fury. I watched the stranger perform his accusation with almost academic interest, noting the slight hesitation in his delivery, the way his eyes kept flickering toward Victoria for confirmation, the amateur quality of his emotional display. I stood slowly, setting down my napkin with deliberate care, and let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone except me. "That's a fascinating story," I said, my voice carrying the calm that comes from absolute certainty. "I'm curious, though. What's your name? Since we apparently spent so many nights together, I should probably remember what to call you." The stranger, the actor, the weapon Victoria had purchased with money she didn't have, faltered visibly, his rehearsed script failing in the face of a response he hadn't anticipated. "I'm Marcus Reynolds. Don't pretend you don't know me." I pulled out my phone with the smooth motion of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, and I smiled with a warmth that didn't reach my eyes. Marcus Reynolds. What a coincidence. "I have here a bank transfer for $5,000 from Victoria Crawford's personal account to a Marcus Reynolds processed 3 days ago. I also have records showing that Mr. Reynolds is a registered actor with the Savannah Community Theater. And I have text messages, obtained through channels I won't bore you with, in which Victoria instructs this actor on exactly what to say tonight, including the specific phrase, 'all those nights together,' which he just used." I had never heard a room of 30 people breathe in unison before, but in that moment, I understood what collective shock sounded like. Subscribe now to watch the destruction I had been saving for exactly this moment. The silence in that private dining room became a living thing, a creature made of held breath and suspended disbelief, and I let it grow until it pressed against the walls like a physical force. Marcus Reynolds, the actor who had been paid to destroy my reputation, stood frozen in the doorway with his mouth slightly open, his rehearsed confidence evaporating like morning fog under a merciless sun. Victoria's face underwent a transformation that I would remember for the rest of my life. The smug satisfaction draining away to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. The mask of Southern gentility cracking to expose the ugliness she had always hidden behind good china and practiced smiles. I held my phone aloft like a torch, the screen displaying the damning evidence I had collected with the same methodical precision my father had taught me to apply to hostile takeovers, And I watched my future mother-in-law realize that she had brought a hired actor to a battle against someone who had been preparing for war since childhood. The other guests remained motionless in their seats, champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips, forks frozen above plates of shrimp and grits. Every eye in the room fixed on the unfolding catastrophe with the horrified fascination of witnesses to a spectacular accident. "I want to be very clear about what is happening here," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent her entire life learning to speak in rooms that didn't want to hear her. Victoria Crawford hired this man to pose as my lover, to humiliate me in front of my family, my fiancé, and everyone in this room on the night before my wedding. She paid $5,000, money, I should note, that she does not actually have, to publicly accuse me of infidelity, to destroy my relationship with her son, and to drive me away from her family forever. I turned to face Marcus Reynolds directly, and I almost felt sorry for the terror in his eyes, the dawning comprehension that he had been recruited as a pawn in a game far beyond his understanding. "You can leave now," I told him, my tone almost gentle. "I don't blame you for taking a job. I blame the woman who thought my dignity could be purchased for the price of a used car." He fled without another word, the door swinging shut behind him, with a finality that seemed to echo through the stunned room. Victoria rose from her seat with the desperate energy of a cornered animal, her carefully maintained composure shattering into something that resembled panic, dressed in designer clothing. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice climbing to a register I had never heard from her before, brittle and sharp and cracking at the edges. "You're lying. You fabricated those messages. Everyone knows you can fake anything with technology these days. Ethan, darling, you can't possibly believe this woman over your own mother." But Ethan was already standing, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen directed at anyone in his family, a cold, clear fury that transformed his gentle features into something almost unrecognizable. He looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, as if all the years of excusing her behavior and believing in her fundamental goodness had suddenly revealed themselves as the elaborate self-deception they had always been. "I watched you type on your phone during the rehearsal," he said, his voice low and controlled in a way that was somehow more devastating than shouting. "You were texting someone, constantly. I thought you were coordinating something for dinner. Now I realize you were directing him." The room erupted into whispers, 30 guests processing the revelation through a filter of shock and schadenfreude, and the particular southern pleasure of witnessing a social downfall that had been a long time coming. Victoria's friends, the women she had lunched with for decades, the society matrons who had validated her sense of superiority, exchanged glances that contained entire conversations, and I could see alliances shifting in real time, the social calculus of Savannah's elite recalibrating to account for this spectacular miscalculation. Richard Crawford, Victoria's husband, had not moved from his seat throughout the entire confrontation, his face a study in weary resignation, and I wondered how many times he had watched his wife's schemes unfold, with exactly this kind of catastrophic result. He caught my eye across the table, and in his gaze I saw something that might have been an apology, or perhaps just the exhaustion of a man who had long ago stopped trying to control forces beyond his understanding. Claire, Ethan's younger sister, was openly crying, but her tears seemed to be ones of relief rather than distress, and she reached across the table to grip my hand with a strength that communicated solidarity more effectively than any words. "You don't understand," Victoria said, and now her voice had taken on a pleading quality that seemed entirely foreign to her nature, the desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse around them. "I was protecting my son. I was protecting our family. She's not one of us, Ethan. She doesn't belong in our world. She's an opportunist, a gold digger, someone who saw your name and your family and decided to attach herself to something she could never achieve on her own." I laughed then, a genuine laugh that contained 8 years of hiding and a lifetime of being underestimated, and the sound seemed to startle Victoria more than anything else that had happened that evening. "Victoria," I said, savoring each syllable of her name like a fine wine, "I think it's time you learned exactly who I am. Not because I need to prove anything to you. I stopped needing to prove myself to people like you a long time ago, but because the irony is simply too delicious to keep to myself any longer." I straightened my posture, feeling the weight of my true identity settle around my shoulders, like a cloak I had set aside years ago, and I smiled with a warmth that contained absolutely no mercy. My name is Vanessa Williams. My father is Marcus Williams, founder and CEO of Monarch Holdings, one of the largest real estate investment companies in the Southeast. Our family's net worth is approximately $2.3 billion. That's billion, with a B, in case the math is challenging for you. I paused to let the numbers sink in, watching Victoria's face cycle through disbelief and shock, and a dawning horror that was almost beautiful in its completeness. I have been living in Savannah for the past 18 months as the anonymous head of Monarch's expansion division. The company your husband has been desperately trying to court for investment. The $6 million that could save your failing law firm from bankruptcy? That decision goes through me. I am literally the person who gets to decide whether your family survives or drowns. The whispers around the table had ceased entirely now, replaced by a silence so profound that I could hear the candles flickering in their crystal holders. You spent 2 years treating me like trash because of the color of my skin, and the entire time I held your fate in my hands. How does that feel, Victoria? How does it feel to know that the woman you dismissed as an opportunist could buy your entire existence with her pocket change? My father rose from his seat with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who had commanded rooms far more hostile than this one, and his presence seemed to fill the space in a way that made Victoria shrink back instinctively. Marcus Williams, at 68, was still an imposing figure, his silver hair and immaculate suit projecting an authority that transcended the specific context of any single gathering. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades spent building an empire from nothing. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, his tone almost conversational. "I have watched you insult my daughter for 2 years. I have listened to her describe your microaggressions, your veiled racism, your relentless campaign to make her feel unwelcome in spaces you believe belong exclusively to people who look like you." He smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "My daughter asked me to stay silent, to let her handle this situation in her own way, and I respected her wishes because she has proven herself more than capable of fighting her own battles. But I want you to know that I see you, Mrs. Crawford. I see exactly what you are, and I want you to spend the rest of your life knowing that Marcus Williams, a black man who built a $2 billion company from nothing, watched you destroy yourself while his daughter held all the cards. Subscribe now to witness the final collapse of everything Victoria Crawford believed she deserved." The morning after the rehearsal dinner dawned with the particular clarity that follows catastrophic storms, the air washed clean of pretense and heavy with the weight of irreversible revelations. I woke in Ethan's arms in the hotel suite my parents had insisted on booking for us, my mind still processing the events of the previous evening, my body surprisingly calm, despite the emotional hurricane I had unleashed just hours before. Ethan had not slept well. I could see it in the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that had not fully released even in rest. But when he looked at me, there was no accusation in his gaze, no resentment at the secrets I had kept. "You could have told me," he said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder with an absent gentleness that made my heart ache. "At any point in the last 18 months, you could have told me who you really were." I considered my response carefully, knowing that this conversation would shape the foundation of our marriage in ways that extended far beyond the ceremony scheduled for that afternoon. "I could have told you," I agreed, sitting up to face him properly, letting the morning light illuminate the honesty I was finally ready to offer without reservation. "But I needed to know that you loved me. Just me, without the money, without the family name, without the power that comes with being a Williams. I spent my whole life watching people calculate my worth based on my father's bank account, and I was so tired of being valuable instead of being loved." My voice cracked slightly on the last word, revealing a vulnerability I rarely permitted anyone to see, and Ethan's expression softened into something that looked like understanding and sorrow intertwined. "When I met you at that gallery, you saw a woman in a simple dress looking at a painting of marsh grass. You asked about my opinions, not my occupation. You fell in love with the person I had built from the ashes of exhaustion, and I needed that to be real before I could trust you with everything else." He pulled me close then, and in the warmth of his embrace, I felt the last walls between us finally begin to crumble. The wedding ceremony itself was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the garden section of Forsyth Park, beneath the ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss that had witnessed generations of Savannah stories unfold beneath their branches. Victoria and Richard Crawford were notably absent from the guest list, A mutual decision reached sometime after midnight when Ethan had called his mother to inform her that she was no longer welcome at his wedding, a conversation I had listened to from across the room with a mixture of pride and sadness for the family he was losing. Claire Crawford was there, serving as a bridesmaid alongside my sister Celeste, and her presence felt like a promise that not everything about the Crawfords was poison. My own family filled the bride's side with a warmth that seemed to radiate outward, my mother resplendent in champagne silk, my father standing tall despite the illness that was slowly claiming his strength, my brother Raymond and his wife adding their joy to the collective celebration of love, surviving adversity. The guest list had shrunk from the 300 Victoria had insisted upon to an intimate gathering of 40 people who actually mattered, and the reduction felt like liberation, rather than loss. I had chosen a simple dress that my mother had worn at her own wedding decades ago, altered to fit my frame, carrying the weight of family history in its vintage lace and delicate beading. My father walked me down the aisle with steps that were slower than they would have been a year ago, but no less proud, and when he placed my hand in Ethan's, he whispered something in my ear that I would carry with me forever. "You taught yourself to be a ghost, baby girl. Now teach yourself to be seen." The ceremony was brief and beautiful, free of the elaborate performances Victoria had planned, centered instead on the simple truth of two people choosing each other in full knowledge of each other's complications. When Ethan kissed me, the applause from our small gathering felt more meaningful than any standing ovation in a crowded ballroom could have been. The reception unfolded in the courtyard of a small restaurant that Ethan and I had discovered during our early dating days, a place with fairy lights strung between magnolia trees, and a chef who made shrimp and grits that tasted like love translated into food. There were no assigned seats, no elaborate table settings, no society photographers documenting every moment for the social pages, just people who cared about us, sharing a meal and celebrating the improbable survival of something beautiful. My mother gave a toast that made everyone cry, speaking about the strength it takes to hide your light, and the courage it takes to finally let it shine. My father spoke briefly about legacy, about building things that matter, about the particular pride of watching your children surpass your own expectations. Claire Crawford raised her glass to new beginnings and the possibility of redemption, and I saw in her eyes the hope that not all of her family's story had been written yet, that some chapters could still be redeemed. We danced beneath the fairy lights until the stars came out, Ethan and I moving together with an ease that felt like it had been practiced over lifetimes rather than learned in months. The music shifted from upbeat celebration to something slower, more intimate, and I rested my head against his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice vibrating against my ear in a way that felt like secrets and safety intertwined. "When you revealed who you were last night, for a moment, just a moment, I was angry. Not at you, exactly, but at the situation. At the fact that you had this enormous secret while I was sharing everything about myself, including the embarrassing parts." He paused, and I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But then I realized something. You gave me a gift I didn't even know I needed. You let me prove to myself that I could love someone without any calculation, without any awareness of what they could offer me. You let me be the person I always hoped I was. I looked up at him then, and in his eyes I saw not just forgiveness, but gratitude. And I understood finally that some secrets, kept for the right reasons, can become the foundation of something unbreakable. Subscribe now to witness the reckoning Victoria Crawford never saw coming. 3 days after the wedding, Victoria Crawford appeared in the lobby of Monarch Holdings' Savannah office, her designer suit slightly rumpled, and her carefully maintained facade showing cracks that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't watched her crumble at the rehearsal dinner. I had been expecting her, not this soon, perhaps, but inevitably, with the certainty of physics applied to desperation, and I had instructed my assistant to allow her up without delay when she arrived. The elevator ride to my corner office took 47 seconds, time I imagined Victoria spent rehearsing whatever speech she had prepared, whatever combination of apology and appeal she believed might salvage the situation she had spent years creating. When she walked through my door and saw me sitting behind a desk that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Savannah River, I watched her face cycle through a gallery of emotions that she couldn't quite control. Shock at the reality of my position, envy at the casual display of power, and beneath it all, the desperate hope of someone who knows they have already lost. "Vanessa," she began, and her voice sounded nothing like the condescending society matron who had spent 2 years dismissing me as unworthy. "I came here to apologize. What I did was unforgivable, I know that, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, for the way I treated you, and for what I tried to do at your rehearsal dinner." She paused, gathering herself for the plea she clearly found humiliating to make. "The firm is in trouble. Serious trouble. We'll be bankrupt within 60 days without intervention, and Richard and I will lose everything. The house, the practice, our reputation in this community. Ethan told me about the investment Monarch was considering, before he stopped speaking to me entirely." Her eyes glistened with tears that might have been genuine, or might have been another performance, and I found I no longer cared enough to determine which. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you, Vanessa, for the sake of the family, for Ethan's sake, even if he's too angry to ask himself." I let the silence stretch between us, the same technique I had used at the rehearsal dinner, and I watched Victoria's composure deteriorate further under the pressure of waiting. My office was designed to intimidate. The massive desk, the original artwork on the walls, the view that spoke of resources and reach beyond anything the Crawfords had ever commanded. And I let the environment do its work while I considered my response. "Victoria," I said finally, her name carrying none of the acid I had allowed myself at our confrontation. "Let me explain something to you about power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from old names and social connections, but the kind that comes from building something with your own hands, from creating value where none existed before." I leaned forward, my fingers steepled beneath my chin, and I spoke with the measured clarity of someone delivering a verdict rather than making a decision. "My grandfather came to Atlanta with nothing. He worked 3 jobs for 22 years to save enough money to buy a single apartment building. My father turned that building into an empire. I walked away from that empire for 8 years, and when my family needed me, I came back and made myself invaluable. That's power. That's legacy. That's what happens when you bet on people instead of against them." Victoria listened with the attentiveness of a prisoner hearing her sentence read, and I could see her hope flickering and dying with each sentence I spoke. "You had a choice," I continued, my voice unwavering despite the emotions churning beneath my composed exterior. "When Ethan brought me home, you could have welcomed me. You could have seen in me someone who understood ambition and family and the weight of expectations. Someone who might have become an ally in preserving everything you claim to care about. Instead, you saw the color of my skin and decided I was a threat. You spent 2 years treating me like trash, making me feel unwelcome in spaces that should have become my home." I stood and walked to the window, letting the view of the river steady me, letting the evidence of my own power remind me that I had earned this moment. "And now you come to me, begging for help, because you finally understand that the woman you tried to destroy was the only person who could save you. Do you have any idea how many times this has happened to me, Victoria? How many people have underestimated me because of how I look, only to come crawling back when they realized their mistake?" The tears were streaming freely down Victoria's face now, her makeup running in rivulets that marred the carefully constructed image she had always presented to the world. "I was wrong," she whispered, and for the first time, I believed she might actually mean it. "I was raised to believe certain things about certain people, and I never questioned those beliefs because questioning them would have meant questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and my world. It's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse, but I want you to understand that I am genuinely trying to see my own failures clearly." She took a shuddering breath, visibly struggling to maintain even a fraction of her composure. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? Not to earn the investment. I understand that's gone. But to begin to make amends for what I've done? To show Ethan that I'm capable of changing, that I'm willing to do the work necessary to be part of his life again?" Her plea hung in the air between us, and I saw in her eyes something that might have been the first genuine humility she had ever allowed herself to feel. I turned from the window to face her fully, and I let my expression convey the complexity of my feelings, the anger that would never fully dissipate, the exhaustion of a lifetime spent fighting battles I should never have had to fight, but also a wisdom that transcended the immediate desire for revenge. "Victoria, I'm not going to invest in Crawford and Associates. That decision was made the moment you hired an actor to call me a cheater in front of everyone I loved." My voice was firm, but not cruel, the delivery of a judgment, rather than the infliction of pain. "Your company will fail. Your house will be auctioned. The life you've built on appearances and prejudices will collapse around you, and there is nothing I can do to prevent that even if I wanted to." I paused, watching her absorb the reality of her situation. "But I'm going to tell you something that might matter more in the long run. Ethan loves you. Despite everything, he loves you, because that's who he is. Someone incapable of cutting people out of his heart completely, even when they've earned it. If you want a relationship with your son, with our future children, you need to become someone worthy of that love, not for the money, not for the social position, but because your soul depends on it." Subscribe now to witness the final reckoning that Victoria Crawford brought upon herself. 67 days after our wedding, Crawford and Associates filed for bankruptcy, and Victoria and Richard Crawford's name disappeared from the social registries they had spent generations cultivating. The mansion in Ardsley Park was purchased at auction by a tech entrepreneur from California who immediately began renovations that stripped away the accumulated pretensions of 7 generations, and the Crawfords retreated to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Pooler, a suburb where nobody knew their name or cared about their former prominence. I watched the news of their collapse with a complicated mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity, understanding that Victoria's punishment was not the financial loss, but the erasure of the identity she had built her entire existence around. Ethan received weekly calls from his mother that he rarely answered, voicemails that oscillated between tearful apologies and bitter accusations, and I never pressured him to respond or to cut her off entirely, recognizing that his relationship with his mother was his own to navigate. The first Christmas after our wedding arrived with the particular magic that the holiday season brings to the South, the historic district draped in lights and garland that softened the edges of even the most severe architecture. Our new home in Isle of Hope had been chosen specifically for its distance from the Crawford legacy, a waterfront property with a dock and a garden and enough space for the family we were beginning to imagine building together. I had thrown myself into decorating with an enthusiasm that surprised even me, transforming every room into a celebration of warmth and welcome, determined to create new traditions that belonged entirely to us. My parents arrived from Atlanta on Christmas Eve, my father moving more slowly than he had the year before, but refusing to acknowledge his limitations. My mother orchestrating everyone's movements with the gentle authority she had perfected over decades of hosting William's family gatherings. Raymond and Celeste came with their families, filling the house with the chaos and laughter of cousins meeting cousins, and Claire Crawford arrived with a hesitant smile and a carefully chosen bottle of wine, still uncertain of her place in this new configuration. The dinner table that evening held 15 people, and as I looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight and animated by conversation, I felt something shift inside me that had been locked in place since childhood. For so many years, I had defined myself by the battles I fought, by the walls I built, by the strategic patience required to survive in spaces that didn't want me. But sitting in my own home, surrounded by people who loved me without calculation, married to a man who had chosen me before he knew what I was worth, I understood finally that winning wasn't the point. The point was this: the laughter, the arguments about football, my father telling embarrassing stories about my childhood while my mother pretended to be scandalized, Ethan's hand finding mine beneath the table with an intimacy that required no words. The point was building something that mattered more than money, more than revenge, more than the satisfaction of watching your enemies fall. The point was love, stubborn and imperfect, and chosen again every single day. After dinner, when the dishes had been cleared and the adults had settled into the living room with coffee and pie, Claire found me alone on the back porch, staring out at the water where the lights of neighboring houses reflected like scattered stars. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice quiet enough that the words felt like a secret shared between sisters. "Not for including me, though that means more than you know, but for showing my brother that he deserved better than what our family taught him to expect." She stood beside me at the railing, and I felt the tentative beginnings of a bond that might someday rival the connection I shared with my own siblings. My mother called me yesterday, asking me to intercede on her behalf. She wanted me to convince you to reconsider the investment, as if the bankruptcy filing was just a negotiating tactic that could still be reversed. Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. I told her that some consequences can't be negotiated, that some bridges burn so completely there's nothing left to rebuild. She didn't understand. She probably never will, but I wanted you to know that I understand. And I'm grateful, Vanessa, for everything. The months that followed wove themselves into a tapestry of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary after a lifetime of fighting for space I should never have had to earn. My father's treatment progressed with cautious optimism, the cancer responding to protocols that gave us hope for years rather than months. Ethan transitioned out of Crawford family practice to join a non-profit legal organization, finding purpose in work that mattered more than billable hours. I continued to lead Monarch's expansion division, but now I did so openly, my name on the door and my face in the industry publications, no longer hiding behind the comfortable armor of anonymity. The secret identity that had protected me had also isolated me, and shedding it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. Savannah became truly home, not just a strategic location, and the woman I had built from the ashes of exhaustion finally merged with the woman I had been born to become. Victoria Crawford's Instagram feed went dark 6 months after the bankruptcy. Her last post, a carefully filtered photograph of her new apartment's small balcony with a caption about new beginnings and humble gratitude that fooled no one who knew the truth. I never sought her out, never gloated over her diminished circumstances, never permitted myself the small cruelty of reminding her what she had lost. The revenge I had wanted so desperately had been delivered, not by any action of mine, but by the simple mathematics of cause and effect, and I found that the satisfaction of watching her fall was far less sustaining than the joy of watching my own life bloom. Ethan eventually resumed limited contact with his mother, phone calls that I could hear through closed doors, conversations that seemed to inch towards something that might someday resemble healing. I didn't interfere, didn't judge, didn't make him choose between his wife and his mother, because I understood better than anyone that family is complicated, and forgiveness is a journey rather than a destination. The photograph that Christmas, the one that would appear on our mantelpiece for years to come, showed 15 people gathered around a table overflowing with food and love and the particular warmth that comes from chosen family. My parents sat at one end, Ethan and I at the other, with siblings and cousins and one former Crawford filling the spaces between. Victoria saw that photograph on Instagram, I was told later, scrolling through Claire's feed from her small apartment in Pooler, and she wept at what she had lost and could never reclaim. But the photograph was not posted for her benefit, not intended as a weapon or a reminder, simply a documentation of truth that needed no explanation. The caption said everything that needed to be said about the year we had survived, the battles we had won, the life we had built from the wreckage of other people's expectations. Family is who chooses you,